Welcome back to Turning Hard Times to Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor. Really pleased to have John Rubino with me once again. Actually, he's here today pinch hitting for David Stockman, who, due to a last-minute commitment, wasn't able to join us. So thanks, John. Thanks for coming on again.
Oh, hey, Jay. Always happy to come on and talk to you.
Well, you're a great relief to me, I'll tell you, and always appreciated, and I know our listeners love hearing what you have to say. I've titled today's show, Playing Three-Card Monte with President Biden. John, you, as a former New Yorker, you worked as a bond analyst on Wall Street for a while. I don't know if those guys would come along and set up their crates with the cards, the three-card Monte games. They would try to suck people into playing. Do you ever see that on the streets of New York? Do you recall that?
Sure. Yeah. I never tried to win, though, because I assumed the game was rigged.
I watched, and I figured, that should be really easy. But then I watched other people playing, and every one of them got snookered. So, no, it looked so easy, but it wasn't easy, obviously. And from what I understand, the dealers never lose in these cases. And it seems to me that's the way it is with politicians as well. And, the Biden administration is telling us they have a $3.5 trillion, I guess, so-called human infrastructure bill that they're urging us, trying to get really trying hard to get it approved. There seems to be some separation within the Democratic Party to moving forward on it. But $3.5 trillion, it's not going to cost us anything, he tells us. What are your thoughts?
Well, the idea that government is lying to us and we should be outraged is getting a little old, right? Because that's been happening for so many years that you could be outraged all day long if you listen to the government continuously because they're always lying, and this is another one that, I think they feel like the people who are on their side to begin with will cut them a lot of slack, and that allows them to say things that aren't true and get away with it. Because, with the Democrats, the mainstream media will basically let them do and say pretty much anything. Mm-hmm. Because the alternative, the Republicans, that's such a horrendous idea for most of the mainstream media that they really don't fact check Democrat politicians. With the exception of Fox, which is the opposite. They do it the other way around. But, inflation is transitory, and $3.5 trillion of new social spending / infrastructure spending can be paid for with the resulting economic growth combined with tax increases. Those are just things that are made up, or let's put it this way, it's not necessarily a complete lie as much as it is wishful thinking on the part of the people who are saying it. Because who knows? You can't predict the future. Therefore, maybe this could turn out that way. Maybe inflation that is now running at 8 or 9% in a lot of sectors in the U.S., maybe it'll just go away next year. Who knows?
Yeah.
It's possible. And we won't know about the infrastructure bill, whether it actually pays for itself until it's completely implemented 10 years from now. And by that time, half the people that were paying attention will have retired and stopped paying attention, or they'll be dead, or they'll be doing, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so it's really important for us, I think, to save our outrage for things that are not business as usual. When they surprise us with something that's even more horrendous than what they normally do, that's a good time to be outraged. But this stuff is just business as usual in the markets. And, the whole don't worry about deficit thing goes all the way back to Ronald Reagan. His tax cuts were going to pay for themselves. And then George W. Bush, no problem. We'll cut taxes on the rich, and that'll generate lots of economic growth, blah, blah, blah. And so both sides do it. They both lie to us. And
oh, that's for sure.
That's what happens in late stage societies where you're getting close to collapse, and the only way to prop everything up is to fool everybody. So it's just a sign of our times.
Keep people believing that the system is solvent. It's just fine. Otherwise, they'll run for the hills, and it will be a self-fulfilling prophecy, I suppose. But so I think that they're counting the Biden administration on the $3.5 trillion. They're counting on $2.1 trillion to be covered by taxing the rich. Well, what happens when they tax the rich? I don't know. We saw Who was it that moved from California to Texas just this week? I guess it's
Elon Musk, Tesla.
Elon Musk, right. So that isn't that what happened. But the point is, of course, what they're trying to do is get a global taxing scheme together so that people can't go from one country to the next. In other words, the people that are in power want to try to take away any sort of freedoms from individuals, I guess, essentially.
Well, yeah, but you actually can't raise taxes dramatically on the rich for two reasons. One is that they'll evade them. I mean, if there's, say, $10 million at stake in income that will be taxed or not taxed, the rich guy is just going to call in his accountant and say, hey, lose that 10 million of income. My marginal income has to go down by 10 million. And the accountant will say, okay, we'll buy you some oil wells and some cattle ranches, and we'll depreciate them up front. And, and so the income that tax increasers think is going to be there just disappears when you try to raise taxes dramatically. And so taxes don't actually generate any new income. They just shift for the government. They just shift the income that's out there to be taxed into different places that aren't taxed. The other thing is that all the major politicians now, left and right and center, are financed by the same handful of rich people. Wall Street is the biggest donator of campaign funds to the Democrats as well as to the Republicans. Same thing with big pharma. Name any industry you want to, and they are financing both parties' candidates. So neither party can do anything to cross these guys, or else they'll just get regime change. They call it now primaried. You will get primaried. In other words, they'll run somebody from your party against you with big money backing. And you'll get kicked out of office if you try to cross these guys. And they know that. So the idea that we're going to raise taxes sufficiently to cover $3.5 trillion of spending is ludicrous. Yeah. And here's where it breaks down. Here's where we go authoritarian, because frequently governments come to power with that kind of a promise, and they try to act on it. And they find they can't get the money from rich people, so they don't want to give up on their programs, so they move down the economic ladder and start taxing the middle class really aggressively. And the middle class try to avoid those taxes, and then the government creates a police force to go get the money from the middle class, and boom, you're in an authoritarian country, and it happens very quickly, and could easily happen here again.
Yeah, it sure seems so. The taxes, the middle class usually gets hosed pretty badly, and of course it isn't just the taxes that we see; it's the invisible tax of inflation. So if they can't raise all that money to pay for these programs, the 2.1 trillion from the rich, and there are all kinds of games, 3-card Monte type games that are played with these numbers as well. So. If they just print money, right? They'll print money, and then we have inflation, and we saw this in the 70s. I'm older than you, John. I remember very well what the 70s were like with G. William Miller and Arthur Burns pumping money into the system like mad. That was after we went off the gold standard, so they could do it. And then we had double-digit inflation. We had also, of course, oil prices, and Michael was on with us a little earlier, and he was talking about how he thinks that we're just starting to see rising energy prices that are going to make life pretty difficult potentially this winter for a lot of people. But you have these prices are starting to rise, which is the real tax on the middle class. And these rich people they were going to get money from, not only do they not tax the rich as they expect or as they claim they will, but those guys don't feel the pain of inflation like average middle class people do.
Well, see, if we're talking about outrage, this is where we should direct our outrage. Because, monetary and fiscal policy, as it's set up right now, benefits. It's not just neutral. It doesn't just bypass the rich. It actually makes the rich richer while squeezing the middle class and basically anybody who's trying to save a little bit of money, because aggressively easy money means low interest rates, which means your savings account doesn't pay you anything. But your stocks and bonds go up. Well, who owns all the stocks and bonds and real estate? It's the rich. So they make tremendous amounts of new money. What was it during the pandemic? It was some number like $40 trillion extra dollars flowed into the 1%. In other words,
Wow.
they got $40 trillion richer. It was some number like that, some crazy number.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest of the country got a little bit poorer during the pandemic. And that's just the way it's been going for quite a while now. And there really isn't any end in sight because the government perceives that it only has one tool, which is easy money whenever there's any kind of trouble. They would probably say the fact that easy money helps the rich at the expense of everybody else is just a coincidental side effect. But I would say it's a feature, not a bug of the system. Like this was planned all along. You know, the banking system, when it took over the government, had in mind a world where everybody's encouraged to borrow crazy amounts of money, and the government responds to that increasing debt with lower and lower interest rates, making the rich already rich or even richer. So, I think it's playing out exactly the way, to the extent that it was planned, what these guys expected. And I don't know what the solution is unless some kind of a crisis is so serious that it causes us to reevaluate our opinion of the people in charge. But that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, one thing they don't want people to realize is the connection between printing money and inflation. And so there's always, and this was true in the 70s, and Milton Friedman came along and reminded us that no, the real reason you have inflation, oil prices may be going up, but guess what? If you weren't printing so much money, they couldn't go up the way they are. Prices are going up because you're giving these units of currency that enable demand to take place, even though supply is shrinking. So guess what? Prices go up. But they don't want people to think about that, and probably because of just what you pointed out. It works very well. I mean, after all, 1913, I think, occurred after J.P. Morgan didn't want to really have to bail out the banking system again. And so we saw in 2008, of course, it was sort of privatize the profits and socialize the losses for the bankers, right? So the whole thing is stacked and obviously in favor of the ruling elite and the rich and the wealthy people. But where is this going to go, John? I mean, it's we got an election coming up in a couple of years. You would think there could be some ramifications for it. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think midterm elections are coming up, and normally the party in power loses some seats in the House and Senate. And right now, the House and Senate are so closely divided that even a small loss flips that House of Congress over to the other party. So we're liable to see a divided government going forward after the next elections, which is part of the reason that the Democrats are so anxious to get everything done now, because they recognize that there's a good chance that they lose their ability to just ram through legislation in another year, another little more than a year. And, that to me is kind of a hopeful thing, because in general, the less this government can do, the less damage they can do, because it's not like they're doing a lot of good stuff out there. Maybe they'll invade fewer countries if they're divided, and maybe monetary and fiscal policy will be a little bit more restrained because they're each watching the other. Each party is trying to restrain the other's worst impulses. So that might be helpful. And then the next election, I kind of think, I'll go way out on a limb now and say that Ron DeSantis of Florida is probably going to be the next president, barring some kind of scandal, because first of all, he fits the profile. He's a swing state governor, and second of all, he's kind of on the side of medical freedom, which I think is a politically trending idea. Probably 70% of the people a year ago were all in favor of whatever vaccine mandate, et cetera, had to be done because they were so afraid of the pandemic. And I think that's shifting. And so I think being on the side of personal freedom will play very well at the time of the next presidential election. And so we could, at least as far as the COVID lockdowns and things like that will be an improvement. But I don't think we should hold out any hope that Republicans will be any better about managing the financial side of things than the Democrats. So, we've got a gigantic financial crisis coming no matter what. Mm-hmm. And there are small political things we can do in the meantime as a country that might improve things for a big chunk of the population. But basically, we've got this giant crisis coming, and there's nothing we can really do to stop that because the numbers are already unmanageable. We've already borrowed too much debt. We cannot manage it. We have only the tool of easy money to lean against a deflationary crash. Oh, we should probably talk about Evergrande in China.
Oh, yes.
While we're on that subject.
Yeah. I mean, where is that standing now? Because that erupted in the middle of September, pretty much. Yeah. I haven't heard about it in the last few days too much, but where does that stand?
The short part of the story is that China's real estate market is much bigger in relation to its economy than the U.S. real estate market, which is to say China's real estate market is immense. And it was very crooked. There were lots of financial scams going on within that market. Lots of money being spent and borrowed that shouldn't have been spent or borrowed. And so now it's starting to blow up. Evergrande is the first domino to fall. It's a gigantic real estate developer that got way, way over leveraged, and now it's falling apart. And that's pulling down all the other real estate developers in a market that depends desperately on real estate. So this could be very serious. And it could go one of two ways. One, they let those companies fail, which is what they should do, but they get a really nasty recession and possibly civil unrest, et cetera, for the next couple of years as a result. Or they try to bail these guys out at the cost of a massive new binge of currency creation, which is probably going to be bad for inflation and bad for the local currency. And so you take on a lot of risks in that direction. And there's no real middle way. There's nothing you can actually do to get yourself from here to some placid, organically growing future without a lot of pain. So China has one of those two things in front of it looks like. And Evergrande is the name at the center of this tsunami.
Yeah, I heard there are a couple of other companies that maybe are on the verge of default as well. But yeah, I saw, John, I don't know, was it from your website perhaps, a chart that showed that on average, the wealth of Chinese people, 70% of it, or I think that was the number, in real estate compared to something like 30 or 35% in America, in the U.S. So obviously real estate, as you pointed out, is a much bigger part of their economy. And they build all these terrifically high-rise buildings in which I understand many of them are still vacant over many years. So the economics, you build it, it's not like a supply and demand driven economy. It's like, government can just spend money and build things and without any realization of whether or not it's economically viable, it seems. So and you goose the numbers, and everybody's has paychecks in their hands. So, but then if there's no production coming out of that, then it doesn't work.
Yeah, that was their version of short-termism. We have the same thing in the U.S., but they just put all their money on real estate. And they generated an economic miracle. Everybody's so impressed with China, but I don't think people realize it's what amounts to 70% of the economy was wasted in a lot of cases, where not only is nobody living in these buildings, but the buildings were made in such a shoddy way that they're going to fall apart before anybody can move into them. I posted a couple of videos on Dollar Collapse of people going around to building sites in China and looking at, the rebar, which is all, rusty and spindly and not nearly as strong as it should be. And there was one where somebody said they were using sticks in place of rebar to reinforce the concrete of the foundation of some building.
My goodness.
They were chopping down saplings and sticking them in there. So a lot of this stuff will come to a head over the next few years when these buildings just start to fall apart.
Well, with just a couple of minutes left here, John, I don't know if we have time to talk about this, but certainly what happens a lot of times, if there is civil unrest, those governments sometimes look to other countries and maybe get involved in conflicts overseas, and that certainly is something that I think a lot of people are concerned about now with Taiwan. And Taiwan, if it were to go to China, could really be a problem, I think, in terms of our supply chain issues, which are really a big issue too now.
Well, that would be the best case scenario in Taiwan's case if it only causes supply chain issues. But,
right.
We're kind of obligated to defend Taiwan, I think. That would be a nightmare. If we send our aircraft carriers right next to China, where all their missiles are based and everything, and start a war with them, first of all, we probably wouldn't do very well. And second of all, two nuclear powers in a shooting war. When have we seen that? Have we ever seen that? Mm-hmm. I really don't know. We never had a shooting war with the Soviet Union, right?
No.
Oh, we came close in the Middle East, but we never did. So this would be a completely new, completely horrific thing, and we're blithely blundering into stuff like that. So finances could be the least of our problem.
Well, finances could be related to a lot of other things. They're all sort of interrelated, I think. Mm-hmm. One thing we do know in terms of what people should own in an inflationary environment is gold. And someone just pointed out that gold is now as cheap as it was in 1970 and in 2000. If you look at the amount of money that's been created to pay for all these programs governments want to win votes with. John, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it go at that. My engineer is telling me it's time to cease. But thank you so much for stepping in for David Stockman today, and you're always welcome here. It's always great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jay.